Hello, everybody. All right, so I'm about to go live on TikTok as well. I had like a few free minutes, about half an hour, where I thought I could just jump on and answer some questions. So if you have any AP Lang questions, feel free to leave them in the comments because we're like a week away, and I know that this is around the time where students start to have lots of questions. So here, let me just put this right here so I can go live on TikTok as well. But yeah, how's everybody doing today? Let me know what questions you have about the AP Lang exam. One of the things that I wanted to talk about today for the AP Lang exam is just what students can be doing to get ready and just like general reminders of what you need to know for exam day. Because I know there's lots of questions about like, what do I need? How do I prepare? What am I allowed to have? What am I not allowed to have? So let's kind of talk about the exam day format and what reminders you might need. So the first thing is like, what do you need to bring with you on exam day? And so I've been telling my students the things that I want them to bring with them on exam day are number two pencils and blue or black ink pens. Now, our school does usually provide this for students, but I do think it's important for students to try to bring their own if possible. Because if you're taking the paper test, you're going to want number two pencils and then blue or black ink pens. And sometimes students ask, like, what color? And it really doesn't matter. I don't know why, but I prefer to write in blue ink. But here's the thing that you might not realize when they scan your essays in for readers to read it, it becomes like black ink. We can actually change like the background of our screen and like have high contrast to read your writing better. So it really doesn't matter what color ink you're writing. Thank you so much for the likes on TikTok. But on exam day, make sure your pen does not smudge. I love Flair pens. They're my favorite. I would not use Flair pen on the exam because they don't really smudge, but they just kind of bleed through a little bit. So, if you're just joining, we're talking about what to remember to bring on exam day. I see a couple questions coming in the comments. So, please feel free to ask more questions that you have. Also, hey, Joe, it was so great to meet you last year. So, pencils, pens, it has to be number two pencils, but I feel like most pencils nowadays are number two. So, that's probably not a big deal. Not mechanical pencils, though. I don't think you're allowed to have mechanical pencils on the exam. And I know a lot of my students prefer that. So, blue or black ink pen, pencils. I recommend bringing a snack. I would double check with your school because our school allows it because you have a 10-minute break in between your MCQ and your FRQ. So our school allows students to have like a little water bottle and a snack. If you are bringing a snack and your school's okay with that, please be considerate of possible allergies and stuff that people might have. I also recommend that students bring a watch. It can't be a Fitbit or an Apple Watch. It has to be essentially something that can't send or receive messages. But if you're looking for inexpensive ones, if you have a Walmart near you or some kind of equivalent store, usually they have a lot of like little kid watches that would still probably fit on your wrist, if I'm being honest. But you could also like lay it down on your desk if that's okay. But they have digital ones and the other kind as well as the analog. Most of my students get digital. The reason why is because, and I've had this happen as a test proctor. So I can't proctor an AP Lang test because I'm an AP Lang teacher, but I can proctor other AP tests. And one time I was given a clock and like I literally couldn't put it up on the wall. And so students could barely see it. Like if they were in the back of the room, they could barely see it. So I think it's important that you have a watch so you can keep track of your time. That way you know how much time is left because the proctor is supposed to keep track of it. And as a student, you need to know how much time you're supposed to have for each section because I've heard of it happening where the proctor got it wrong and people had less time than they were supposed to. So I would bring a watch on test day if you can get one, especially if you're taking multiple AP tests. The watches, like the cheap ones at Walmart, are like $5. So I know that might be kind of expensive for some people. It might $5 might be nothing to other people, but try to get a little watch. So to recap, pens, pencils, if your school doesn't provide that, a snack if you're allowed to have one, and a watch. I would wear comfy clothes because you're going to be sitting there for like basically 4 hours. The test is 3 hours, 15 minutes total, but there's like basic intro info that they have to give you. And there's like time at the end where you have to put everything all together. So just plan on being there for about 4 hours. Also, make sure you set an alarm the day before and get to your testing location early, especially if it's Like, I mean, even if it's at your school, still just get there early. Why an AP teacher can't be with students on exam day? It's just a testing violation because like somebody could possibly cheat. So I literally go to like the opposite end of our school and I stay away from the hallway where we test. So what pen doesn't smudge but writes smoothly? Honestly, the ones that I give students a lot are the Bic pens. I wish I had one here that I could show you, but they're like you can buy them in bulk usually, and they're usually really cheap, but they don't smudge. And they're just kind of like a really cheap and expensive pen. I personally really love Flair pens, but like I said before, I wouldn't use that on the exam. Not because they smudge, but more because they bleed through. Okay, awesome. I see a lot of really good questions coming through on TikTok and also on YouTube. So I'll try to get to all those. Just to let people know, it is 11:20 my time, and I will be on until about noon. And then if I can come back on later, I will. I actually just have to tutor at noon. So I want to make sure that I could hop on for a little bit. Yes, great reminder from Joe over on YouTube, no highlighters. I really wish y'all could have highlighters because in class, a lot of times we tell you to highlight. The closest thing that you can kind of do to highlighting is you can have a blue ink pen and a black ink pen and you can kind of alternate, which is not exactly highlighting, but it's the closest thing that you could do. Yes, and if the proctor is wrong, you need to speak up. I told my students this last year. I swear I jinxed them because I read this post about from an AP lit teacher in a different state, and she was like, my kids didn't get enough time. So me being me, I told my students this and I was like, hey, y'all need to have your designated speak up person. And luckily one of my former soccer players was in the room and she was like, I got this, Coach Hall. If the time is wrong, I'm going to speak up. I jinxed them, y'all. The proctor was about to move on 20 minutes early and my girl was like, nope, 20 more minutes. And the proctor checked and she was like, oh, I'm so sorry. So know your timing and you can speak up, advocate for yourselves if the timing is wrong. Not to like stress you out or scare you, but I swear I jinxed them last year. Okay, let's start answering questions that people have. Thank you so much for submitting them. And thank you so much for the likes over on TikTok. If you're watching on YouTube and you find this helpful, I would love a like there as well. Should I read the whole passage for the reading section? Honestly, for some of the questions, you kind of need to read the whole passage. Some of the questions can be answered if you just read certain sections. But remember that sometimes, even if it asks you about like line whatever or paragraph whatever, sometimes you need to read the surrounding stuff as well. I was working with a student actually last night, and we were talking about a question that she had, and it was more for the writing and not the reading, but the sentence was reproduced below, and she was like, oh, well, I got the answer wrong because I didn't actually read it in context. Don't do that. It's a good lesson to learn now. Make sure you're reading the context. But for some of the passages or some of the questions rather, yes, you're going to need to read the whole passage, but a lot of them you can answer sort of quickly. So if you feel like you're running out of time, definitely prioritize the ones that you feel you can answer most quickly. A lot of my students like the writing MCQ, which is the last 3 passages. They like those better. This year, probably 75% of my students are going to start with those questions because they're like, we're faster with them, we're more accurate with them, and they're just trying to get the highest score they can. So then they're going to go back to the reading questions. So that might be a technique that some of you prefer to use as well. And that's just part of like creating your game plan. You really want to think about how can I maximize my score? So what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? And then how can I react accordingly? Because literally the test is all about earning as many points as you can. I know that's probably really obvious, but sometimes the difference between like a 3 composite and a 4 composite, you could be like 2 points away. So we want to make sure we're like using our time as effectively as possible. How much time should I spend per question? So for the multiple choice, if you use the whole 60 minutes, because not everybody does, some people read really quickly. But I would say it's, even though it feels like the questions are evenly split, like about half are reading and about half are writing, most of my students need a little bit more time on the reading than the writing. So I would say between 30 and 35 minutes on the reading, hopefully closer to the 30, and then like 25 to 30 on the writing. Now, if you're like, I'm really good at the writing, but I just need a little bit more time with those, adjust that accordingly. But don't feel bad if you're spending more time on reading. It's because those are more dense questions. It's comprehension. It takes longer. but you definitely don't want to be spending 40 or 45 minutes on those first two passages because then you're going to have to rush through the second part. So just be mindful of that. Also, if you are running out of time, let's say they tell you there's like, I don't know, let's say you figure out that there's 5 minutes left and you're like, I have 10 questions left. Answer the ones that you can answer quickly, but bubble in something for every question. So pick a letter because they've done studies on this and I don't know the exact like math behind it, but basically if you start trying to make patterns or pictures or something, you're not going to answer as many correct, or at least like the probability is less. So if you choose one letter, we call it straight line bubbling, and you just choose that letter all the way down, you are more likely to get it right. Also, it's kind of myth that C is the most common answer. I have looked at it, and this is totally anecdotal, unofficial, but A and D sometimes tend to have a few more, like you might be a little bit more likely with A or D, sometimes B, I don't know. But like I would not just automatically choose C if it was me, but choose a letter, whatever letter feels good to you that day, and bubble straight down. And then if you have time and you could go back and fill in one or two, great. But you want to at least answer every question on multiple choice because if there are 5 answer choices, you have a 20% chance of getting it right, even if it's a complete guess. If you can narrow it down to 2, that's your odds are better. But I would much rather you answer everything because there's no penalty for guessing. So if you can get a couple extra points by that straight line bubbling, that's better than leaving them blank. And so that's just a test taking strategy. Yeah, I don't know, A or D, apparently they're just slightly more common than C as an answer, but like, don't take my word for it because I could be wrong. But the ones I've looked at, those were the 2 that had a slight edge. A lot of people think it's C. If it's a test made by like a teacher, then C might actually be more common, but apparently standardized tests, it's A or D. I don't know. At this point, just pick a letter. Okay, so awesome. Thank you so much for the questions. Let me try to answer some more on TikTok because I appreciate y'all liking the live there. And I know I've skipped some questions. So thank you for being patient with me. If you're not following, please do so because I intend to go live as much as I can between now and the test. And I would love to be able to help you study for the exam. Also, if you're watching on TikTok, if you want additional help, there are there's certain words you're not supposed to say on TikTok. There's information in my profile about how I can help you study. I hate that you can't say like the basic words. All right, how to write a good thesis. Well, it depends on which essay we're talking about, but for argument and synthesis, make sure you're using the keywords of the prompt. So if the prompt says the value of whatever, make sure that that phrasing is clear in your prompt because you want to make sure you're actually answering the question. For rhetorical analysis, it is super important that you have rhetorical choices. I prefer that my students write them in verb form. However, if you write them in the noun form, it is still allowed. I like to see choices plus message, argument, or purpose, whichever one the prompt is asking. The rubric technically only says choices, but it feels like you're only answering half the question if you don't have the message, argument, or purpose. You can write for synthesis or argument, you can write a counter argument thesis. If you want it to be a little bit more of a complex sentence or complex claim, that's not required. But make sure there's different types of thesis statements. Most students do what we call a closed thesis. Some teachers don't like a closed thesis because when you go to college and you're writing like a 20-page paper, you can't do a closed thesis. A closed thesis basically means that you're spelling out your main points like A, B, C. Well, when you write a 20-page paper, you can't do that. Now, here's the thing. Respectfully, you're not writing a 20-page paper. You're writing probably a 4 or 5 paragraph paper, and you're doing it in 40 minutes under duress. So in my opinion, there is nothing wrong with a closed thesis. A lot of the thesis statement sentence frames that I have on YouTube and here on TikTok as well are closed thesis statements, and it helps you write it more quickly. It's also, in some cases, in my opinion, it's easier for the reader to see. I personally recommend that your thesis be the last sentence of your intro because that's usually where we look for it anyway. Technically, it can be anywhere in your essay, but we're looking for it as the last sentence in your intro. If you are running out of time and you need a quick intro, just write a thesis. You don't have to do all this fluff. Really, your body paragraphs are more important anyway. So yeah, it's like a teacher thing, but some people really don't like the closed thesis. I try not to like get on my soapbox too often, but like I will fight for the closed thesis. It's easier for students. As students, you're probably like, okay, whatever. But yeah, if you want thesis statements, sentence frames, I do have some to help you write it more quickly. What are some strong verbs you recommend for rhetorical analysis? Okay, great question. Let me think of the ones that I have seen students use most frequently. Let's talk about some of the basics. So like instead of saying uses repetition, let's say repeats and then tell us what they repeat, like what word or phrase. Compares can be a good one. Contrasts. A fancy word for contrast is juxtaposes. So juxtaposition is a meaningful contrast. So juxtaposes works. Instead of saying like uses logos or uses pathos or anything like that, try to narrow it down to what they're actually doing. So for instance, are they providing facts or statistics to make it logical? That's going to sound better. I would rather read provides facts or includes facts as opposed to uses logos. Now, for an emotional appeal, you could say appeals to and then tell us what the emotion is. Don't just say emotion, because emotion can be anything. Like you could be appealing to patriotism, fear, nostalgia, like we don't know. So if you just say emotion, you're assuming that the person reading your paper knows, and we can't infer. So you have to spell it out for us. That's a conversation I had to have with my class yesterday. They were like, well, what if we're too repetitive? Like we can't infer, so you have to put it there. And I would rather you be a little bit repetitive and make sure it's there than for you to not put it there. Because even if I think I know what you're talking about, if it's not on the in the essay, I can't. So instead of saying appeals to an emotion, you could say evokes a sense of, like evokes a sense of patriotism, or elicits a sense of, elicits with an E in that case, elicits a sense of. Other strong verbs for like rhetorical choices, even things like acknowledges can be really helpful. Justifies, if that's what they're doing. Other verbs to include in your essay, showcases sounds better than shows. Illustrates, highlights, underscores is a good one to know because sometimes they put that on multiple choice. I've talked about this a lot on TikTok in different videos, but underscores means emphasizes. So if you could say emphasizes, you could say underscores. And that one's on multiple choice, so it's a good one to know. There's probably more that I haven't thought of or said. Can you bring highlighters to the exam? Unfortunately, no, you can't. It's not allowed in the testing stuff. The closest thing you can do is bring a pen that has blue ink and one that has black ink and kind of color code that way if you want to. I had a student, she didn't actually do it, but she was kind of joking a few years ago that she was going to bring like all her different shades of blue pens because she had several. We talked about it and it probably wasn't going to actually help her. She did well on the test, but she's like, well, if I can't highlight, I can bring every shade of blue I have. And she was one of those students who has like 20 pens like in her bag at all times. So yeah, unfortunately, no highlighters. How do you write good commentary for rhetorical analysis? The thing that I like to see students do is connect the choice that they're analyzing to the rhetorical situation. And what I mean by that is you really have to be answering the question, why is the person making this choice for this audience on this occasion? So we have to think about why they're doing it. And so the occasion, let's think about it. Is it an inaugural address? Is it State of the Union? Is it a funeral? Is it a commencement speech? Are they speaking at some kind of rally? Is it after a tragedy? Because that occasion, when that changes, the choices that you make change, and including like your word choice and your tone. You also want to think about who the audience is, because if they're speaking to a single person versus a large crowd, they might make different choices. If they're speaking to a group of people who agree with them, they're going to make different choices than if it's people who don't agree with them. So those things all matter. I have a video on YouTube. It's called something like My Best Tip for RA Commentary. And I go into that in quite a lot of detail. If you're looking for tips, I also have a sentence frame video. I got a shout out over on YouTube. It says, I highly recommend your sentence frames that you recently made for FRQ2. So if you go in my recent videos on YouTube, I have a sentence frame video, one for Q1 and Q3, which are synthesis and argument, and one for rhetorical analysis. Personally, I love teaching rhetorical analysis. It's my favorite one. So I really feel like if you need RA videos, definitely check out some of the stuff on my channel. But those sentence frames can help you articulate your commentary better. Because what I found a lot of times is students understand it, they just don't know how to put it in words. So those sentence frames can help. Let's see. I answered that one. I'm scared for the exam. That's okay. Here's the thing. And this is just, I'm not saying this is why you're scared, but this is a pep talk that I give to my students. I have yet to give it to them. I usually give it to them the day before the test. But like, let's not overthink things too much and become a self-fulfilling prophecy, because it's possible that the very first multiple choice passage you get is going to be hard. Just because the passage is hard, it doesn't mean the questions are hard. Sometimes the questions are actually easy when the passage is hard. And if it's hard for you, I promise it's going to be hard for other people in your testing room, other people in your state, other people in the nation and the world. So like, don't assume like, oh, I bombed it. Like, talk yourself up. Like, you are smart, you are strong, you are well prepared for this, and like, keep those negative thoughts at bay. Because if it's hard, that gets taken into consideration. And so just trust that you know what you're doing. So for your essays, make sure you have a good thesis. Make sure you have specific evidence. Write as much commentary as you can. And please use all your time. Some people don't need the full hour for multiple choice, but for your essays, I get so stressed when like I'm doing an in-class essay and someone's got like 5 minutes left and they're just sitting there. You could be adding more commentary. You could be proofreading. You could be doing something. Please use your full time on exam day, but don't get stressed out about like, oh, this question's hard, especially if it's an essay question. If it's hard, save it for last. Play to your strengths, do the easy ones first. But if it's hard for you, it's probably hard for everybody. And that gets taken into consideration later. So just trust the process, but like, don't get worked up over one section of the test, because that's why you have a composite score. So I hope that made sense, but like, I'm not saying don't be stressed about the test. It's a big deal. It's important to you. That's probably why you're nervous. And that's a good thing. It shows that you care. But as someone who like would sometimes get very anxious in high school, if you're the type of person that like spirals into the negative, try not to spiral. Easier said than done though. Okay, let's see. Some tips for synthesis essays. I struggled to connect to the source as well. Okay, so for synthesis, the big thing obviously is that you need 3 sources. I recommend trying to put 2 per paragraph, because it starts to create this like conversation of sources. One thing that I think a lot of students struggle with synthesis is they're good at choosing evidence to support their claim. We want to embed that evidence if we can. We don't want to just drop a quote in. So we want to like take a short quote and kind of weave it into a sentence, or kind of paraphrase it if we need to. I think the real issue with synthesis is that people struggle to explain the significance of the evidence. So if you chose that quote, think about why you chose it. Like, what is it showing us? Also ask yourself, why does this matter? So look for facts, statistics, like any kind of like quantitative data, real world examples or testimonials, because those can be more convincing. But ask yourself, like, so what? Like, what does this show? How does this impact society? You can use personal experience in some synthesis prompts. The last couple years, it was like STEM and cursive. There's even some on AP Classroom that I think lend themselves well to personal commentary. And so that could help you situate the issue in a broader context. I've been talking to my students about that lately, because I feel like it's, in some cases, it almost seems like a missed opportunity, because I'm like, I know you have personal experience with this. You could increase your commentary that way. But just always please make sure you have 3 sources. Let's see. Wait, closed thesis are better than open thesis? Closed thesis, I believe, are more effective for the constraints of the exam. It's most students write a closed thesis on the exam, and it's easier for them to do so. When you are in college and you're writing larger papers, a closed thesis likely will not work. Some teachers prefer an open thesis because they think it sounds more sophisticated, but sometimes these are much harder for students to do on the exam. So my personal belief is we need to acknowledge that you are writing a rough draft in 40 minutes of a prompt you've never seen before, and a closed thesis is fine. Actually, as a reader, it's sometimes easier to identify the closed thesis. Is there a minimum amount of evidence you recommend we should include in the argument essay? So I guess technically the minimum, it would be 2 examples because you either need to decide, am I going to do 1 major example per paragraph? Can I really develop it well? Or am I going to do 2? So you want to aim for 2, maybe 3 body paragraphs. A lot of my students do 2. And so if they do 1 example for each paragraph, the minimum is 2 concrete specific pieces of evidence that they can really develop. A lot of my students try to put 2 per paragraph, in which case they might have 4. So for my students, it's a range of usually 2 to 4. You do not need a counter argument paragraph. If you think it will help your essay, by all means include one, but it's not necessary. Just make sure that whatever example you choose is clearly proving your thesis. You want to provide appropriate context. So like, don't assume that we know who it is. So like, even when you're talking about somebody really famous, like Martin Luther King or Rosa Parks or George Washington, you still have to tell us who that person is and explain that in relation to the prompt. So if you're talking about, let's say your topic is adversity, you have to tell us why said person experienced adversity. So what was the adversity they faced? How did they deal with it? What do we learn from it? And that can be really helpful. Let's see. Can we use erasable pen? I don't think so. I would not recommend it. Oh, thank you for the gift on Facebook, or sorry, Facebook. Wow, on TikTok. The Earth is really cool. Let's see. How do you score higher in rhetorical analysis? The best thing you can do for all the essays is to have stronger commentary and really make sure that you are proving all your claims. So usually students don't really struggle so much with the evidence, in my opinion. It's the commentary. Like they have evidence, but they don't necessarily have developed commentary, or it's inconsistent. And that's why their score might not be as high as they want. So if you're doing any of the essays, you want to make sure that you're consistent with both paragraphs. If you're writing 2 body paragraphs, if you're doing 3, you want to be consistent with all 3. Because usually we see like 1 good paragraph and 1 that's so-so, and therefore you might get like a 130 and not a 140, that kind of thing. And then there's, of course, the sophistication point, which there's different ways to earn that. For rhetorical analysis, I think the easiest way is to situate it in a broader context. So really think about, is the passage significant historically? And if so, why? Really be thinking about like how the message is relevant for that time period. In the conclusion, you could talk about how the message is relevant today, but just really deeply analyzing why the rhetorical choices are relevant to that rhetorical situation. What type of evidence is wrong and what are we allowed to use? For argument, avoid hypotheticals, which would be like, suppose a student does this, or imagine a person does this, because those come across as kind of cheesy and they're just not concrete real world examples. So avoid hypotheticals and try to avoid generalized evidence. Like some people think this, or you should do this. Instead, try to have a proper noun. So like some kind of concrete name of a specific person or company or event, whatever it is, that makes it more specific. Because if you just start talking about like athletes do this, well, that might be true. But if you can tell me Simone Biles did this and here's why it matters, that's going to be a better essay. Let's see. For rhetorical analysis, I struggle with narrowing down the purpose of the passage, which leads to very broad commentary. Okay, so I think with purpose, we want to think about like what is their overall goal? And we really want to think about like what their objective is. Like, why are they writing or speaking? So sometimes people think of it a little bit simplistically. They're like, oh, they want to entertain, which is usually not what they put on the exam. They want to inform, they want to persuade. But it's like, inform whom about what? Like, try to be very specific. Like, what is their goal? Because if you can answer the question, why are they writing or speaking, that's going to help you with purpose. And then also, something to consider would be like, what is the purpose of each section? So like if you divide your passage up beginning, middle, end, it's helpful to ask yourself like, okay, what is the purpose of the beginning, the middle, and the end? Because that kind of usually relates to their overall purpose. What is the best way to think of sources for argument essays? Okay, so for argument essays, you come up with your own evidence. I use the acronym CHORES: current events, history, outside knowledge, reading, experience, and science. And the outside knowledge is a catch-all. It could be sports, it could be pop culture. So that can help you come up with evidence. You don't need one from every category or anything like that, but that can be helpful as far as like types of evidence to consider. What about something politically charged? Should we avoid such evidence? That's a great question. Okay, so here's what I tell my students. Remember that the one thing AP readers have in common is we are all some form of an English teacher. Most of us teach high school English. Some people teach like a college level, like freshman comp kind of like writing class, but we're all English teachers. We come from different parts of the country. We have different beliefs and different backgrounds. Now, we are not supposed to project our personal beliefs on a student's essay. That being said, a lot of readers tend to lean more progressively. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm not saying you should. I'm just saying it's kind of a trend. So I've read political evidence from my own students on both sides. And the thing I can say is make sure that you are backing up what you're saying with concrete facts and not opinion. Because as I tell my students, it doesn't matter what I believe. I take myself out of it. I'm looking for, can you prove your claim? So if you are like attacking someone's character, or you're just kind of using these sweeping generalizations about a person, like a political candidate or something, that's not going to be convincing. Whether I like the person or not, it doesn't matter. It's, are you proving it? So we just have to have that line between, are you giving opinion or are you giving fact? And just kind of make sure you're backing up what you're saying. So I'm not saying avoid politics, because plenty of students do talk about it successfully on the exam. Just make sure that what you're saying is very specific, very concrete, and it's clearly proving the point that you're trying to make. Okay, we have lots of messages here on TikTok. So let me see if I can do that. If I wrote a note for my grader, will they be nicer grading? No, we get a lot of notes though, and pictures and other stuff. Please don't bother writing us a note. It won't affect your score. The one thing I don't mind to see, and it doesn't affect the score, but it just kind of, I don't know, it doesn't bother me, is if a kid writes like did not finish. Like, it doesn't change how I score it, but I don't mind to see that. But like, please don't like write us these like sob stories about like just your life. Like, please just focus on the exam. Use your time to answer the essay. What should I do if I can't come up with evidence for the argument essay? So you can write about personal experience. Try to keep it something that's actually real though, because sometimes students make stuff up and it's super obvious. But I recommend kind of thinking before the exam, think about maybe 3 to 5 historical figures that you know really well, especially if you're like in APUSH or another history class where you've learned about these people. Choose like 3 to 5 people that you can write about really well, and choose like 3 to 5 events like from history that you could write about well. Choose 3 to 5 like living people, pop culture, sports, whatever, that you could write about really well. And what I would do is I would go watch a TED Talk, watch a documentary, listen to podcasts. I like to listen to podcasts anyway, and I'll listen to them like as I'm getting ready, or I can like plug my phone into my car and play them as I'm driving. Most of you probably don't have a very long drive to school, I would guess, but for me, it takes about like 30 minutes. So I can listen to a podcast episode in that time. If you're just kind of like doing laundry around the house or something, you can listen to a podcast. And the reason why I say like documentaries, podcasts, TED Talks, also articles, like you could read a newspaper article online, is because you can supplement the information. So if you're like, man, I really like Simone Biles and I know a decent amount about her. Okay, cool. In the next week, go research her some more. So that way you can use facts about her in your essays. So like even little things like the fact that she's a 7-time Olympian. If I can say Simone Biles, comma, not 7-time Olympian, 7-time Olympic medalist, my bad, 7-time Olympic medalist, comma, and then like tell about what she does, that would be like, it would help the specific evidence. So those little facts can be helpful. So choose things that you're already interested in. Don't go studying like quantum physics or something just because you think it's going to make you sound smart. Choose the stuff that you already like and just know that stuff well. And as far as what you should study, choose things that you think you could write about well, but also that could hit a bunch of different prompts. So think about like people who have had to struggle, who've experienced like success and failure and that kind of thing. Because if it's a really open-ended kind of philosophical prompt, you could probably use those people. And I would maybe choose people who aren't super obvious. If you feel comfortable with that, like there's nothing wrong with writing about like Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, Thomas Edison, but we read a lot of essays about those people for certain prompts, and I have no clue what the prompt is going to be this year. So maybe choose people that are a little bit less obvious. Some of my students who take APUSH, like I have activities that they have to do where they kind of write about different people to practice. And a lot of them like to write about like Alice Paul because they learned about her in history class. And like I guess if you take that history class, you know about her, but other people might not. So she's kind of a good figure, but she's more niche. So maybe like some of those people that you're interested in. Some of the best essays I've read have been about like people that the student clearly knew about, but like maybe weren't so mainstream. Let's see. All right. Hopefully we got I think I got all the questions over on YouTube. Let's double check what we got over here on TikTok. If you're enjoying this, please keep liking the live. Thanks to those who shared it. I'll be on for about 10 more minutes. And then I'm going to try to come back on later this afternoon or this evening. But if you're not following, please do so because I go live each Sunday, 3 p.m. Eastern time. So I'll be live tomorrow. And then as the exam approaches, I'll be just popping on randomly to do lives and to answer questions. Also, if you are looking for additional help, I have a whole bunch of playlists over on YouTube with lots of videos. I would love to support your exam studying in that way. I've been doing a lot of stuff on TikTok, answering quick questions. Been trying my hand at YouTube Shorts, which is kind of like TikTok. So if you're like, I just want quick tips, that's a great option. And then if you're on YouTube, I have some tutoring info in the description. If you're on TikTok and you're interested in like tutoring or other things, the information's in my profile. And I'm happy to answer questions about that as well. Okay, what is the most accurate AP Lang exam calculator? They're all very similar. If you're looking for one online, I think Albert.io has one that's good. And I think Marco Learning has one that's good as well. There's also a formula you could use to calculate it yourself. So basically each multiple choice question is worth 1 point. And then you take your essays, like whatever number it is out of 6, and I multiply it by 3.0566. So you're going to make sure that you have all 3 essays included there, multiply it by that, and then you add your multiple choice and your essays together. It should be, and then you can round, and it should be a number out of 100. And so to get a 3, you want to be approximately like 53 points. It could be 51, 52, but like generally that range. For those looking for like a 5 composite, we want to be closer to like 73 points. And it can kind of shift like each year. But those, the online ones are pretty accurate. Okay, what if worst case scenario, I can't find any rhetorical choices? So 2 things. One, there's always word choice and tone. So if you are totally lost, word choice creates tone. So I would look at the word choice they're using and the tone it creates, and you've got a paragraph right there. Better option is possibly to realize that that a choice doesn't have to be as specific as we think it is. Like if you're like, oh, I don't see any comparison, I don't see any repetition, that's okay. Ask yourself, what are they doing? I wish I can remember what year this was on the exam, but it's an older prompt. I think it's a letter. Who is it to? It's a 3-paragraph letter, and it's basically like this lady apparently had written to this like archbishop or something, asking him to recommend her son for college. And it's like from the 1700s or something. And so he crafts a rejection, and it's 3 paragraphs. And so I haven't given it to my students this year. But in the past I have, because it's one where it's really hard to find what we think of traditionally as rhetorical choices, because there really isn't any repetition and there really isn't any comparison. And so we use that as what is he doing in the first paragraph? And I don't remember the exact order of the 3 paragraphs. So if I get it wrong, bear with me. But here's like the general kind of thing. It's like, okay, first he acknowledges what she requested. Okay, then he explains in the next paragraph why he cannot like adhere to her request. Like basically like he acknowledges what she requests and he rejects the request. Then he explains his reasoning, and then that kind of thing. So if you say acknowledges or explains, that can count as a rhetorical choice. So really think about what are they doing. So if you don't see the traditional like repetition, comparison, those kinds of things, just be a little bit more broad in your thinking and ask like, okay, what are they doing? And that can really help as well. I'm an international student, so can I use an international figure? Yes. And US students can use international figures as well. So choose the best evidence for your argument. You don't feel like just because your reader's probably American that you have to use American evidence. So yeah, you can definitely use like international stuff. Really just like, because I work with students from other countries sometimes, and like a lot of them have really good knowledge of American culture, but every once in a while, like they'll be telling me something about their respective country, and I'm like, that is fascinating. Like use that as examples. Because like you just have to kind of like provide the context, like let us know like who the person is, or what the event is. And you could do that very concisely, but as long as we understand that and then you give us commentary, it works just fine. And sometimes those examples are, I don't want to say better, but they're like unique and refreshing because it's kind of like we learn something too. Thank you so much for the likes on TikTok. How is your weekend? So far, it's good. It's been a rainy weekend here though. We've had a lot of rain and I'm kind of over it. That's probably bad to say though. I'm sure like it's probably necessary. Let's see. How do we back up personal experience and how many personal experience can we use? Okay, so let's start with the first part. How do we like back it up? Okay, so you're going to want to remember that just like with any other example, we need context. Like we need to know what happened. So that could take like a few sentences possibly. I like it when students do like in a positive phrase or a non-restrictive clause for their evidence. So that's when you like have like something and then you put like the comma and then you explain it and you put the comma and then you finish your sentence, if that makes sense. So try to vary your sentence structure if you can. With personal experience, really focus on like a meaningful experience and then personal growth. So like don't write about something kind of like cheesy or silly. Make sure it's something that's meaningful. And then usually it kind of depends on the prompt, but usually for commentary, we want to focus on like obviously like why it mattered. So like what is the lesson that you learned from this experience? So what's like the takeaway from it? How are you a better or different person because of this? How did you grow or improve? That's probably going to be the more meaningful commentary because presumably the example you're choosing is highlighting some like reason behind it, if that makes sense. So with personal experience, really focus on like a meaningful experience, tell us what it is, and then tell us why it matters to you, like how you grew and that kind of thing. I do have a video on my channel about writing about personal experience that gives some examples and goes into more detail, which might help. As far as how many personal experiences you can include, there isn't really a limit. I like to see a little bit of variety, but I suppose some prompts might lend themselves better to personal experience. So really the better question, I think, instead of like asking yourself how many personal experiences you could use, is just ask yourself simply, what is the best evidence to prove my claim? Because you kind of have your overarching thesis, and then you're going to have like main idea 1 for body paragraph 1, main idea 2 for body paragraph 2. So instead of worrying about like having too much evidence from any one particular category, if you will, ask yourself what is going to be most convincing, because that's going to help your score more than anything else. So I do like to see some variety. I do like to see maybe like a historical example and a personal example, or like a pop culture example and a personal example or something. But I've had kids use all historical evidence in essays and it was fine. Excuse me. I've had kids use all current events and it was fine. And it really just comes down to what can you write about best. Do AP readers have time to check facts? No, we're not allowed to. So like if you write about some like, I don't know, basketball star, I can't just like start fact checking you on the exam. So then the question becomes, well, can we make it up? We usually won't know. But when like the thing that I don't like is when kids are like, oh, 5 out of 6, I don't know, dentists said this. Like that's probably very obviously made up. But if I've read some great essays where like the student was clearly very knowledgeable about a certain type of music or a certain athlete, and like you could just tell that they knew these facts. So no, we can't fact check you. We're not allowed to. We don't have that option. When do you usually go live? Sundays at 3 p.m. Eastern time. So tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern time. And then as the exam approaches this week, we have one more week, but between now and the exam, I can't promise I'll go live every day, but I am going to try to go live very frequently over the next week on TikTok and YouTube. I try to do both simultaneously. So if you are not following on either of those platforms, please do so. Please tell your friends if you think this would be beneficial to them. I do have to like hop off right now because I'm about to tutor, but I'll try to come back on later today. If you have questions that I didn't get to answer, I sincerely apologize. I will come back on live later. If you are on TikTok, feel free to take your question and comment on a recent video of mine. That helps me a little, but that way I can also know it's your question and I can respond to you and give you your answer. And same thing on YouTube. Sometimes it's a little harder on YouTube to answer questions, but I would be happy to do so. So yeah, but thank you so much for like joining. Why don't I get a notification when you go live? I don't know. If you have notifications turned on, you should get a notification. Sometimes I think it glitches though. So just on YouTube, double check that you have the little bell that like you click it and it's like to get notified. And then I'm not sure on TikTok how to get notified. But I will be going live frequently. And if I missed your question or if you think of one later, feel free to reach out and I will do my best to answer those. Also, make sure you're following because I'm going to be doing a lot on TikTok and YouTube Shorts to answer some of the more common questions. So if you don't like get an answer right away, it's possible that I might have made a quick video about it as well. And you all watching those videos really helps my channel grow. So I so appreciate that. All right, I will hopefully see some of y'all later today. I'm not really sure what time, I'm sorry, but I will hop on live later today to answer more questions. Thank you.